Welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you are a real worship leader with a real question and you want a real answer, head right here and submit your question for a future episode. Got some good questions this week? Let's talk about it. Hi, Spencer. Thanks for all the great content. I want to ask what your thoughts are about the expectations of team volunteers in terms of their instruments/gear. My specific scenario is that I primarily play the electric guitar, but if no one else is available, I'm asked to play acoustic. I typically play once a month. I've added to my personal gear over the years, but everything is very much done on a budget. My acoustic is good for practicing, but it's not really up to playing in the band, whereas my electric guitar setup is more band-worthy. My internal conflict is that as well as leading worship well, I want to manage my finances well. Arguably, I could spend lots of money on additional gear/instruments, but for once a month, it does not seem like a good use of funds, especially when I'm happy to use my budget gear in a home setting. My church does provide instruments for the team, as you might expect, the drum kit, microphones, piano, etc., but musicians with smaller instruments are expected to bring their own. Thanks again, Mark. So I guess the question is, you never actually said this, Mark, but should churches buy instruments for their worship team members? And here is my answer. It should not be expected that the church would buy you a guitar, but that doesn't mean that it can never happen. So the solution is to say everything. I feel like I always say this. Take everything that you just told me and tell it to your worship team leader and explain yourself. Those things that you said to me, they don't have to be secret. Those are perfectly fine things to tell your worship team leader. I would love if a worship team member on my team had a problem like that, and if they came up to me and said, "Hey, Spencer, I know that you asked me to play acoustic guitar, but the guitar that I have isn't really set up for that, and so I've got a much better electric guitar setup that actually works with how we play together as a band, and I feel like I've dialed that in, but as far as the acoustic side goes, like I don't even have an acoustic electric guitar, and I only have like $100 guitar that doesn't sound very good, and I don't really feel comfortable using it to lead the church on Sunday because I don't think it's quite at that quality to even use for that. And so for now, like, unless there's another solution, unless there's another guitar that I can use, I don't feel like I can play acoustic guitar with the gear that I have right now. And in that, you're not saying to them, "Hey, if you want me to play acoustic guitar, you need to buy me an acoustic guitar," right? I mean, if you explain it the way that I just explained it, it's abundantly clear what the options are. My acoustic guitar is not capable of being played on Sunday morning because it's not going to work, which, I mean, I would ask you if that's really the case. If you've used it before, then it's usable. But let's say it's not. Let's say your acoustic guitar is a piece of junk and you can't plug it into the system and you have no way to mic it or whatever. If you go up to your worship leader and say the things that I explained before, then your worship leader will get the idea that there are only one of two options. First of all, well, I guess there's three options technically. First of all, you aren't going to play your acoustic guitar, and they have to ask you to play electric guitar because that's what you have. Number two, the other option is your worship leader says, "Wow, well, you know what? I'd really like an acoustic guitar on our team, so let me find it in the worship ministry budget to buy an acoustic guitar that we can keep here at the church, and not just you, but anybody who needs an acoustic guitar can play it." Now, I say that not as that should be the expectation of what happens. I'm just saying that that's a potential option, but not that it should be expected, because I don't think that that's the normal thing in churches. Or, number three, okay, at some point, you are going to save up enough money to buy an acoustic guitar that costs $200, $300, probably $300 or something, until you feel comfortable that it'll sound good enough to play with your team on Sunday. Those are the three options, and you don't need to explain those three options to your worship team leader if you say the things that I told you to say if you go through that mock conversation that I said at the beginning of this video. And I think that that is a perfectly appropriate conversation to have. Now, why does the church typically buy a drum set for the church? Why does the church typically buy a keyboard for the church or microphones? Well, when it comes to drums and a keyboard or piano, those aren't portable instruments that like your drummer's not going to break down their drum set from their house and bring it into the church every single Sunday. That's a lot of work. With a keyboard, I mean, I guess you could. It's a little more portable than a drum set, but you're not going to break that down and carry in this big keyboard every Sunday, typically. And so those things are kept to the church just for convenience. When it comes to microphones, a singer doesn't need a microphone. Like, it's not their instrument isn't the microphone. The microphone is the thing that helps them be being heard. So in the same sense, a microphone is like your direct box. Or if you're, if you're being heard through your electric guitar, there's probably one of two things that's happening. Either your amp is being mic'd, so you have a microphone too, or if you're playing through a modeling unit, you're probably getting plugged into a direct box or something, and you probably don't provide that. You probably don't provide the wires that connect you to the sound system. So I wouldn't mention microphones because that's sort of a whole different thing. It's not an instrument. But the long and short of it is, don't expect your church to buy you a portable instrument. If you want to play that instrument, if you want to play that instrument, then find a way to make it work. If you don't want to play that instrument and you don't think that it's that important, which is what you're saying I only play once a month, that's a perfectly fine conversation to have and a perfectly fine position to hold as well. I'd only play this 12 times a year at church. Probably not worth it right now with the money that I have. I can't afford to do that for the benefit that I'm getting. So we've got to find out a different solution. That's fine too. But don't expect the church to buy you a portable instrument, but that's not to say that it could never happen. So bring it up to your worship team leader, and that way you're at least on the same page. How do you find the balance between quality and quantity in a worship team? Our church has not done auditions for the worship team in the past unless they were recruited. Anyone who was interested in joining the team and could carry a tune was added to the rotation. I've since used your toolkit to put some expectations in place, but how or should I work back through the existing members? I feel pulled in two different directions. I want to facilitate the opportunity for people to serve in our worship ministry, but I also want to improve the quality of our worship services. To keep everyone involved, we are currently trying to encourage the whole team to learn to harmonize and leaning on our leads to sing melody so that the congregation knows who to follow. What would you do differently, or how would you proceed? Thank you. This question keeps coming up, and I really need to make a full-length video at some point, but essentially the question is this isn't exactly what you asked, but it's the same vein, is I inherited worship team members, and we didn't have expectations for worship team members back then, but now we've got expectations, and those original worship team members didn't sign up for those expectations, but now those are the expectations of the team. So how do I recommunicate those expectations to the worship team without just kicking them off if they say, well, I'm not going to do that? But you said, now that I have the expectations in place, should I go back through the old worship team members? And I'm not sure if you mean, it sounds like you're speaking more musically here, and now you probably have like higher standards musically, where before you said it's just anybody really who wanted to sing. You said who could carry a tune, but to me that's not a very high standard, right? It was just they like to sing, essentially. So that's the expectation. That was the expectation back then, but now you're like, no, I actually want them to sound good. How do I get those people up to where they need to be to sound good on a Sunday morning? And so here's the thing that you have to realize. Number one, realize that it was your fault that you didn't have expectations set for your worship team, which means that we don't just go punish people who we let on the worship team and say, you shouldn't have been on the worship team in the first place. What you need to do is you need to now intentionally work with them to get them to the point where they are at that quality. If they've had, back then, as long as you weren't just letting like horrible singers on your team, there's probably hope for them to serve in some capacity. Maybe they aren't leading a song every Sunday, but they're able to sing background harmony, which is what it sounded like you were talking about. They're able to do that if you work with them. So your job as somebody who has implemented a change in your church, and this is not just for you as a worship team leader who has implemented a change in your church. Changes are implemented in church all the time. Our job as leaders in the church is to shepherd people through that change. And that means being patient with them. So it's not like we can just throw out a change and say, this is the new way that we're doing it. If you don't do it this way, then you can't be on the team. Now, in some extreme cases, spiritually extreme cases, if you let anybody, for example, if you let unbelievers on your worship team and now you're like, we aren't going to have unbelievers on our worship team, that would be a serious case where you've made a decision and it's not just a skill thing that somebody can work into. That might be a case where you have to take a little more decisive action. But in what you're talking about where you've just set the expectations now, you need to allow your team time to grow into those expectations, but you also need to guide them in growing into those expectations. For example, let's say you implemented, because I know in the worship team toolkit, which I'll link down in the description below, I talk about memorizing your music. That's something that I want my team to do. If I inherited a team or if that was never an expectation for my team, I might put that in the worship team code of conduct for new team members. But if my team's never done that before, I wouldn't just go up to them and say, guys, we're going to start memorizing our music and you need to have it done this Sunday or even within the next month or something. I would walk them through, okay, this is how you memorize your music. We do that together, and then it would be like, okay, for one of these songs during the service, I'm going to pick a song that we all know really well. We've been doing this song for 3 years. We should have it memorized at this point, or it'll at least be easier to memorize at this point. We're going to memorize that one song and only do one song without our music stand in front of us or without looking at our music stand. And then you introduce a new song and you do it progressively until they're comfortable with their songs being memorized. So use that technique and apply it to whatever specific thing you need to do. If it's singing harmony, don't just say, if you can't sing harmony, then you're off the team. Say, I'm going to walk alongside you, teaching you how to sing harmony, and the other people on the team who already know how to sing harmony are going to help you as well, and we're going to work on it together. So that's how I wouldn't go back through unless there was some extreme case like I talked about before. I wouldn't just go back through and say, all of these expectations that I should have had in the first place, they're now here for you, and you need to instantly live up to them. I'm speaking specifically of musical quality-wise. Seek to raise up the musicians on your team to that level. Walk them through it. Don't just say you should be here, I'm going to kick you off the team. Now, if you want to check out the worship team toolkit that the person who asked this question referenced, which is my worship team code of conduct and the application form that I have people fill out before they join my worship team, I'll link that down in the description below. You can pretty much just copy and paste it right into your worship ministry, and it will give you a document that you can hand new worship team members that will set expectations for your team so that you can actually hold them to the expectations in the future. So check that out down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.